Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in the year 2021. Today is day 176, and we're looking at 1 Kings 15 and 2 Chronicles 13 to 16. So let's just get right into this. We're going to go through a whole bunch of kings here because after the stability of David and Solomon, we go through a succinction of kings, at least in Israel. And what we have here is in Judah, we have Rehoboam's son, Abijam. He becomes king for 3 years. So Abijam followed all the sinful ways of his father before him. He didn't follow the Lord his God with all his heart, like his ancestor David. Even so, on account of David, the Lord his God gave Abijam a lamp in Jerusalem by supporting his son who succeeded him and by preserving in Jerusalem. So that's what's happening there in Judah. And we have King Asa then coming. Abijam's son is Asa, and he's king for 41 years. So there's some continuity there for you. And Asa started off really well. So Asa did the right things in the Lord's eyes, just like his father David. He removed the consecrated workers from the land, and he did away with all the worthless idols that his predecessors had made. The predecessors included his great grandfather, Solomon. So you have Solomon and Abijam, who did all the things that the Lord didn't want to have done, and Asa comes in and he cleans up their mess. So and it started off well in verse 14. Though the shrines weren't eliminated, nevertheless, Asa remained committed with all his heart to the Lord throughout his life. Now, the shrines, understand what the shrines were places that people set up to make offerings. And those were illegal because you're supposed to go to the temple to make the offerings. But these were in place. It was still the worship of Yahweh, but it was done incorrectly. And then we have over here in Israel, we have Nadab is going to become king. Now, he's only king for 2 years. So in 1 Kings 15, 25 to 26, we have Jeroboam's son Nadab became king of Israel in the 2nd year of Judah's king Asa. He ruled over Israel for 2 years. He did evil in the Lord's eyes by walking in the way of his father, Jeroboam. And the sin Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. So that is the worship of the 2 calves. It's the homemade religion that is set up. But so he doesn't last very long at all. And so then we have Baasha who takes over. Now, understand that, in Judah, what we're having these consecutive kings, but they're all from David's line. They're all from the same family. But in Israel, it just, whoever's the strongest becomes king. It's just whoever has the strongest army, whoever has the most supporters, that becomes king, and there's no connection to them at all. So we read here in verse 28, Baasha killed Nadab in the 3rd year of Judah's king Asa and ruled in Nadab's place. It's not good to be a king in Israel. The life expectancy isn't very long. And then we see here in verse 29 that Baasha is actually fulfillment of the prophecy that was given. When he became king, Baasha attacked the entire house of Jeroboam. He didn't allow any living person to survive in Jeroboam's family. He wiped them out according to the Lord's words spoken by the Lord's servant Abijam of Shiloh. So, Jeroboam and his family paid a high price for setting up a homemade religion. And we see here in verse 33 to 34, Baasha really becomes the enemy of Asa being the king of Judah. So in the 3rd year of Judah's king, Asa, Baasha, Ahijah's son, became king over all Israel. He ruled in Tirzah for 24 years. So some stability here. 24 years he managed to hold on to power. But he did evil in the Lord's eyes by walking in Jeroboam's ways and the sin he had caused Israel to commit. So not much improvement there at all. And we find this conflict happens between Asa and Jeroboam. Not Jeroboam. Baasha, yeah, that's it, Baasha. So they're out there, they're having this war, and a big speech is given about how Israel is in the wrong place, and Judah's going to win because Judah is for the Lord and still worships Yahweh. And while they're talking, they're surrounded. They're surrounded. A trap is laid. And so when they see this, we pick it up here. When Judah looked around and suddenly realized that they were surrounded, they cried out to the Lord, while the priests sounded the trumpets and raised the battle cry. And you remember way back that was the priest's responsibility, that they were the ones to announce the advance, the battle cry. So that's what they've done here. They're following this. So they sounded the trumpets and raised the battle cry. When they raised the battle cry, God defeated Jeroboam and all Israel before Abijam and Judah. So yeah. I didn't notice we had switched over to 2 Chronicles 13. So that was between Jeroboam and Abijah. Okay, so sorry about that mix up there. So continuing on in the 2 Chronicles 14, we see that Asa, okay, he's a good king, and we see what happens here when a good king is in place, a king that worships Yahweh. So Asa did what was right and good in the Lord his God's eyes. He removed the foreign altars and shrines, smashed the sacred pillars, cut down the sacred poles, and urged Judah to seek the Lord, the God of their ancestors. By doing that, the instruction and the commandments required, doing what the instructions and the commandments required. So then we see this result in verse 6 of 14. When the land was at peace, he built fortified cities in Judah. There was no war in those years because the Lord had given him rest. So he had this big victory over Israel. We're talking about Asa here. There's peace, okay, and there's prosperity. And so we hear in verse 11. Again, we have this is the victory I'm talking about, this big victory thing here. This is an amazing thing that happens because Judah is outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Okay, then Asa cried out to the Lord his God, Lord, only you can help the weak against the powerful. Help us, Lord our God, because we rely on you and we have marched against the multitude in your name. You are the Lord our God. Don't let a mere human stand against you. It's quite a powerful prayer. It's a place of desperation where we need to be with the Lord. We always need to be desperate for him. We should always be in a place where we can't do it ourselves, and we need his help. And that's where Asa is finding himself here. And he loves the Lord, and he's been doing what's right. And so he cries out. And what do we find? So the Lord struck the Cushites before Asa and Judah. So here we had Jeroboam, okay, and Israel had him surrounded, and he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord gave him victory. Here, Asa, who is a better servant to the Lord than what Rehoboam was, sorry, and we have this situation, okay, against the Cushites. So Asa and Judah against the Cushites, and the Lord struck the Cushites, and the Cushites fled. Asa and his troops chased them as far as Gerar. The Cushites fell until there were no survivors. They were completely crushed by the Lord and his army, who carried off a huge amount of loot and attacked all the cities surrounding Gerar, who were terrified of the Lord. They plundered all these cities as well, because there was a great amount of loot in them. So this is one of these historical victories that is just going to give them a backbone now. They're going to stand up against every enemy, and it's an amazing thing that's happened, and rah, 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 and it's legend, and they're going to live off that glory for a while, and they're in a place of peace. The Lord now establishes peace for them. And that's what we find in chapter 15, verse 2. A prophet, right after this victory, a prophet was sent to encourage Asa. Listen to me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin, he said. The Lord is with you as long as you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you abandon him, he will abandon you. It's the same old message again and again and again. Stay with me, and it will go well for you. Be faithful to me. It will go well for you. If you forget me, it's not going to go well for you. And this is the conclusion of what was said to them. But as for you, be brave and don't lose heart. Be brave and don't lose heart, because your work will be rewarded. That was for the encouragement after this great battle. And so we have these reforms that Asa now looks at in verse 8 of chapter 15. As soon as Asa heard these words in the prophecy of Azariah, Obed's son, he felt brave and removed the detestable idols from all of Judah and Benjamin, as well as from the cities he had captured in Ephraim's highlands. And he repaired the Lord's altar that stood before the Lord's entrance hall. So there's this rebirth that happens, this reformation, if you want, this revival of Yahweh worship, because the Lord has showed his hand and he gave a promise, and Asa wants to go by that promise. So there's this renewed covenant that happens too. In verse 12, they made a covenant to seek the Lord of their ancestors, with all their heart and all their being. That's pretty good revival right there. So in verse 14 to 15, they swore this to the Lord with a loud voice, shouts of joy, and blasts from trumpets and horns. All Judah was delighted with the solemn pledge, because they had sworn it with all their hearts. When they enthusiastically sought God, he was found by them, and the Lord gave them peace on every side. So yeah, they get to enjoy this peace, but peace makes you soft too. Sometimes when you don't have conflict, sometimes it can be very difficult. So we have here in 2 Chronicles 16:2, this is many years later, we find Asa forgetting about this victory, forgetting how they had won this victory, and Israel is causing problems. So what does Asa do? Well, he took silver and gold from the treasuries of the Lord's temple and the royal palace and sent them to Aram's king Ben-Hadad, who ruled in Damascus, with the following message. So he hires Ben-Hadad of Aram. He goes to a foreigner. He doesn't run to Yahweh. He goes to this foreign king, hires him as mercenaries to come in and cause problems for Israel to withdraw. It works, but at what price? Yeah, and that's what we find in verse 7 and 9. A prophet is sent. At that time, Hanani, the seer, came to Judah's king Asa and said to him, because you relied on Aram's king and not on the Lord your God, the army of Aram's king has slipped out of your grasp. Weren't the Cushites and the Libyans a vast army with chariots and horsemen to spare? Still, when you relied on the Lord, he delivered them into your power, because the Lord's eyes scan the whole world to strengthen those who are committed to him with all their hearts. Your foolishness means that you will have war on your hands from now on. Yikes. That's just yuck. Yuck. But what a revelation there. The Lord's eyes scan the whole world to strengthen those who are committed to him with all their hearts. Not so good for Asa. And Asa had a wrong reaction. He had a wrong reaction to this correction. And then we're going to make mistakes. And we need to be willing to be corrected, but don't react the way that Asa did. Asa was angry with the seer. Asa was so mad he threw Hanani in jail and took his anger out on some of the people. Wow, that's not a good king. So he'd really grown soft in his relationship with Yahweh over those years of peace. And he hardened his heart. We see that in verse 12. In the 39th year of his rule, Asa developed a severe foot disease. But even in his illness, he refused to seek the Lord and consulted doctors instead. That's where he was. He did the same thing here as he did with the armies. He, instead of seeking the Lord, he sought the help of, he hired on another king. And here, instead of seeking the Lord concerning this disease, he hired doctors instead. He hardened his heart to the Lord, and that's not good. And that's something to consider today. How much are we relying on the Lord? How much are we just doing things by our own thinking, our own desire, our own will, instead of resting on the Lord? That is, listen, every time I read that, it causes me to stop and consider, where am I in this? Where do I measure up? What is my relationship like? Yeah, that's some stuff there I'm going to leave for you to ponder and reflect on and meditate and spend some time with the Lord. So you guys be blessed in this day. And I pray that you will trust the Lord and lean into him. And I pray you'll discover just how faithful he is. God bless.